I'm actually somebody who I love ceramics, and I've loved ceramics for a very long time. And I had a period in the 90s doing raku stupas. I would do that when I went back to New York for the summers, and anyway. And I must say, at that point in the 90s, everybody in the art world in New York was like, you're making ceramics? And so now it's very interesting to see ceramics. I mean, it hasn't happened overnight, but move into a mainstream dialogue. I mean, New York is just awash. The galleries are all showing ceramics and everything. And some very traditional kind of vases and pots and things, but other things more sculptural and all that. And I would attribute this to the rise of the fact that we all live more and more on our phones in a digital world. We've seen actually, and other gallerists in Europe and New York agree with me, that people don't want to come to galleries for photo shows anymore. And I think it's because as human beings we are now consuming more photography than, we're all eating up at least hundreds, if not thousands of pictures and videos a day. So when people go to the gallery, they want a very different experience. It's like, okay, enough of the photography. We've got it here all day long in our face. And we've really seen the art world, part of the art world has gone towards the NFT, more technology, more digital, but that's gotten a lot of backlash too. And I think more of the art world has gone much more to ceramics, specifically ceramics and textile work, which has really been celebrated and really moved into the mainstream. Other more craft type forms also, but it's been a big deal, really big deal in New York and London, and which just brings me to this show and Rahul's work in this show, because these pieces here are actually the most conventional. When we think of ceramics, these are, I'm assuming, were done on a wheel. Yeah, these two pieces, but nothing else is. I mean, a lot of it is not the type of forms that you expect to encounter with ceramics and all that. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us about your history with the medium, how you got started, and what's your trajectory to this point?
So I mean, just taking a slight step back before I answer the specific question. I mean, for me, I think the idea of ceramic being accepted as an art form, I think it's not about the media, it's not about the material, I think it's what you do with it. I think the most recognized contemporary artists just slapped together stainless steel utensils and made sculptures out of it, right? So I think it's not about the medium, it's about what you do with it. In my mind.
Well, that's true with oil paint and canvas too.
Right, and therefore, absolutely. So it's not medium specificity in my mind, the way I see it. It's about, and there's a reason why it is incredibly difficult for ceramists to move, and that will then start my journey as well. So I think, if not all, most of us were trained to be potters. We start on the wheel, we perfect the understanding of the medium, how to handle clay,
And where did you do that?
Firing and glazing. Well, I started at Delhi Blue, but then very quickly moved to study with Dipali Darose. She wasn't married to Darose then, but also had a lot of influence of Darose because he would keep visiting and critiquing, and we would see him work. So it was certainly pushing the boundaries, being around Darose and seeing what he did. But perfecting the craft of it was incredibly important. And once I was able to do that, perfect is a big word and a strong word, but once I was comfortable throwing and glazing and firing and all of that, it started to become very limiting. I had this deep desire and need to do more. So my first sort of something that was close to art was to actually leave a mark on a beautifully thrown perfect pot, and people would go, oh, it was perfect till 3 minutes back, what did you do to it, right?
But that was just with the glaze.
And the form itself, undulate the form and sort of started to sort of do something to leave my mark, because I felt anybody with the skill would be able to replicate what I'm doing. So I need to do more to it, without quite understanding the idea of art at that time. So
Because you never really studied art.
I never studied art till that point.
Which you really concentrate, you really make that decision. I mean, you weren't studying art, you were studying to be a ceramicist, a potter.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I was. And I wanted to do more with it, and I didn't quite know what and how. Western education was a desire, and formal art education was also a desire. I ended up applying for a scholarship, the Fulbright scholarship, and I got a master's grant, and I went and studied in the University of Dallas. And I think that,
And there you studied fine art.
yes, fine arts with a concentration in ceramics. And that, I think, really equipped me to be on the journey to express through the medium of clay, and for a very long time the subject of a vessel. So I think till up until 2015, I was still making vessels, but sort of on that sort of journey to express and to say, to tell a story.
Your title, The Untold Resides Somewhere. I mean, it's got a number of conundrums in there.
Sure.
And what I mean, how? I mean, you can't really define the untold because it defies definition. That's
Right.
the nature of the untold.
Right, and that's exactly
It's a secret.
why. And it is a secret, and it remains that way.
I see. So that's what you see most of this body of work being about. The
Yes.
secretive.
Yes, it continues to be untold, but the idea of, and that's what I'm actually sort of trying to play with. See, keep in mind also, when you look at the text-oriented work, I have a parallel profession of being a writer and an editor, where there cannot be ambiguity in a written word. And if it is ambiguous, and mind you again, it's journalistic writing, it's not poetry, which is open to a lot of interpretations as a work of art. But when you're writing journalistically, or if I'm editing another writer's work, it really has to have clarity of thought and almost a singularity of that interpretation, right? And when I work back in the studio, it's actually very liberating to use the very text or reference to script, but without really saying anything.
The place of the ceramic in there, because it's quite a, I mean, when I came in for the opening and saw those, I almost did think, because the surface is so strange and ambiguous, I almost thought they were done on like slates,
Of clay?
Pieces of clay, yeah, that had been fired, which gave it the, but that's not the case.
That's not the case. It's everything that you see is clay, because there's a thick coat of clay on paper.
Like a slip.
Like a slip. It slip, not like.
It
Exactly
is slip.
that.
It is exactly slip. Oh.
But
doesn't slip like destroy the paper?
no, it doesn't. It doesn't wrinkle it if you know how to do it.
Oh.
I'm happy to share how. Peter said why, but I will be very happy to
Don't
tell
give
how.
away your secrets. No, it's quite a bizarre, enticing, provocative material that you've developed. Don't tell people how to do it.
Well, I think the
Don't
secret
give away your
is in
secret.
the idea. It's not the process. I'm not, and that
I
really.
think artists should hold on to their technical
All right,
secrets.
fine. All right, I'm not.
Often
telling
in the
how I
gallery,
did it.
people do come in and ask me, how did the artist do this? I said, I don't ask. I mean, I ask the materials, and you want the materials to be archival. You don't want to try to sell something that's going to fall apart in a couple weeks and all that. And we check that sort of stuff. But I don't ask artists how they make things.
So here's a counter question. Being attached to a process, a methodology, I mean, aren't we paying a lot more attention? All good art rides on craft, but then that craft and that idea of it, why is that special?
Well, because I think technique is important, and I think because I want to see an artist make commitments. Because now I tell young artists this all the time. It's about the problem now is anything can be art, right? I mean, there's no boundaries. And if I go and spit in the corner and say it's a sculpture, It's a sculpture.
Yeah.
But if I do nothing but spit in corners for 30 years, people will be like, wow, all he did was spit in the corner. That's commitment. And now, because there's so much multiplicity, there's so much freedom, unlimited freedom for artists, that I think what I'm looking for is the artist has to make commitment to something. And that can be a material or a technique or a framework of content. Often it's the two things. It's a subject and it's a material. But that's the only way, through that commitment and then the repetition, the spending time with these things, is how you make an art that's deeper and more profound, but also more accomplished and more successful, in the sense that, you know, it's resolved, but it's also, and perhaps you're taking these materials through that experimentation, you're taking these materials to some place they've never been before. But you're only going to be able to do that, as you did, as you're saying, with mastering the first basics and learning that.
And probably that grounding. And that's also probably a reason why not a lot of ceramists very naturally enter the art world. Because it's very easy to be very, very attached to the glazed recipe, and I won't tell you, and it'll go with me kind of an attitude. And that's something that I feel.
You mean as in terms of a secret technique, glazed recipe?
Well, glazed recipes and the process.
It becomes your signature.
Exactly. Yeah. And in my mind, you know, that really cannot and should not be anyone's signature. Yes, I did experiment and failed, and I developed the right way to do it. Sure, I mean, yes, it did take that commitment. But I think what I'm doing with it, the whole formal aspect of it, the imagery, and therefore how it is adding to my narrative, I think that is special, that at best someone can copy, but that's mine.
What was it? What is this the first time you've combined ceramics with paper in this form?
Yes.
This is the first time it's exhibited. You've mixed ceramics with metals.
Right.
And I guess I'm surprised that I didn't see any pieces of that ilk here in this show.
Right. I mean, that was a sort of a separate body of work that I'd actually created quite some time back.
Which, was going to be in there, so we got delayed because of the pandemic.
Exactly.
So you got that out of your system?
No, I wouldn't say that. I certainly wouldn't say that. The gloss, the color, at the moment, it's not something
now thinking about it, I'm sorry we don't have pictures to show everyone, but they're very different than anything in this show.
With color and gloss is something that...
They're bright colors. They're very, very like bright turquoise and bright green colors, high gloss, and then they're little funny abstract, like, how would you describe them? Like blocky things, but they have articulated surfaces, and then he's made these iron armatures of all different shapes and sizes that combine into them to make these they're almost robotic. They look high tech.
Right.
Everything here is very much more earthy, much more. All the colors are natural.
Correct, and I think, and I'm glad we're talking about that. I think it's again, so a painter using only black paint and suddenly uses red. I think that should not really be the defining point. That work needed color. That work needed that reflective surface, and I chose to use that process. But what this narrative and the commentary is all about needed the naked clay. It really needed the earthy tones and only the black and white. And again, sort of a good dive into that as to why this did not need color. I think the rawness of clay was important for sort of talking about the untold and something which is sort of restrained, as well as the form is important more than anything that gets added to it. So it's either black, white, or it's absolutely color of the clay.
So you're sort of saying that there's a more honesty about the materials here. You're not disguising them with colors, with gloss, all that sort of thing.
Right.
Oh, interesting. You said a lot of the titles are not. You even changed the title because you want the titles to refer to the processes. The making of the things, almost like verbs rather than nouns.
Right. It's more of verbs as to the action of what we do when we look at what sort of remains untold, or when we're looking at something that's broken, that's preserved. We contain it, we protect it, we box it, we bunch it. So those are sort of either the ideas which came to mind and then I created the work, or a lot of times actually the other way around. A form would get created and then I am responding to what it's doing to me and how it is fitting into this broader narrative for this particular show. But yes, they're all sort of the actions of the verbs, you know, and therefore not nouns. Yes.
And Rubina says in her notes, well, she says that the works, they speak of time, they mark the bygones as buried, eaten away by insects or partially destroyed. I mean, there is a lot of deconstruction in this show, a lot of things where you feel like either they've been made and then you've pulled them apart, or they're consciously shards, especially, I mean, like these, so, and then the big piece, which actually is just broken.
Industrial ceramics broken and
broken up together.
Brought together.
So
I think the act of deconstruction could also be methodical and thought through. Here the idea is
here it seems more, but it doesn't seem
shattered
and chance based.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So it's not very calculated deconstruction. It is deconstruction, but more of a destruction. You know, more of.
Is that how a lot of these pieces are arrived at? You actually make them and then you mess it up, or that's just the interpretation I have. It doesn't happen that way.
No, you know, the beginning and the start is a lot of happenstance in the studio, as organized as I otherwise am. It's pretty messy in the studio.
But there's experimentation and surprises that you follow
all
through
the time.
With. Yeah, well, but that's a good.
You know, in fact, you know, going back to this particular work. I was creating this body of work. I was actually creating, you know, from a slab. I was creating another work, and I was taking away the positive, and what was left as a negative felt like script. And then I was like, wait a minute, does it mean something? And you know, and I started to play with it, and sort of the whole thing came about like that. So there are accidents, there are these freak happenstance where you just accept what's happening and you go with the flow. And a lot of times meaning making for me happens after the work's actually been made.
The meaning making. I mean, the wonderful thing about a painting or a simple sculpture is that it doesn't have a narrative. It's kind of its own sealed moment in time that doesn't have to have a story. So I'm getting a little frustrated with everybody wanting everything to tell stories, because isn't part of the art object, the individual art object, that it is a moment that's separated out of time, and it doesn't need a story. It's internally complete, and it's just a sort of meditative unit that doesn't need more. Because it seems to me narrative is about adding the story and adding time to it and adding, you know, cause and effect and all this stuff. And I just think that's why we're attracted to art, is to get away from that stuff. Which I also think I'm also, you know, very against language and art. That's why I like this, because it's gibberish, it's not real language. But to me, you know, looking at art is one of the few things that isn't completely colonized by language.
So, I mean, I agree with you, and therefore the context of the work, I think the context of the work is still important, but to get to the context as to why I created, why I'm doing what I'm doing, that point of entry should not really be dependent on, before you read the text, you will not understand what this is. So I do believe it needs to visually first connect and attract you, and then it should be that much easier for you to enter into the context of why did I do what I did. And I think to that extent, it's important to have, you know, some associations and appropriations. But, you know, to really first have a very deep sort of a concept note or tutorial note without which you can't enter works, that's not what my art is hopefully about, and that's not the kind of art that I personally do appreciate myself.
They seem to be cast, and now, because these are, I think, some of my favorite works in the show, and then coming back again and seeing it again, and then, as you said, then you've got that little paper piece, and I immediately associated that, which I didn't recognize as paper. I assumed that was ceramic also, because it has now, are these cast from some form? They feel like they've been molded from something that you've either made or found?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big thick. I'm telling the technique. Is that all right? It's a big thick slab of clay, and I'm literally just going crazy, punching onto it, and certain sort of negative.
And then I don't know what's the name of that technique, the Japanese technique.
Kintsugi.
Kintsugi. So that was something that you envisioned doing to these things from the very beginning.
Right,
I'm
because
gonna
I
use
knew they would crack.
Kintsugi on these. Oh, you knew they would crack.
Yeah, they're very.
Oh,
thick.
so this is not faked at all. These are real cracks.
These are real cracks. Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, okay. Because I didn't know. I thought it was like just sort of faking.
No,
What's it called? Kintsugi.
Kintsugi.
Everyone knows kintsugi. Is that kintsugi?
Well, kintsugi is when you are celebrating something which is damaged, something that's broken, and you're actually not just mending it, but you fill it with gold to celebrate that imperfection.
This is a standout piece. The title of this
Matrix.
being Matrix. How did that come about? Because again, it seems like another technique entirely, a completely different approach.
So, and it's interesting that I talked to you about this, because the origin of this were two artists' work that I saw way back in 2012. One of them in Bombay at a film studio. It was a Subodh Gupta show. And why I say it's interesting, I talked to
Studios.
you. Yes, the one in 2012, was that the show? But there was a massive cube of compressed utensils that he did.
Oh, yeah.
And very soon after that, I saw a work of Manish Nagy.
Oh, interesting.
Again,
Compressed
bringing
things.
compressed utensils.
Ah.
So I came back to the studio and I actually compressed freshly thrown pots as early as something like 2013-14.
Oh.
And it didn't make any sense at that time, and I just sort of left it in.
Is that piece? When is this dated? Matrix is 2023.
This is of
brand
course
new.
made now, because I referred back to the work while I was working for this show, and it felt that I could use that in this context, and I revisited just throwing these fresh pots and just smashing them together. Pretty straightforward, nothing complicated, but it's something that I referred to, visually.
Well, it ends up being kind of the most opaque work in the show, because I didn't recognize it. I mean, at the opening, I said that somebody said, "Oh, it's smash pots," but I didn't get that at all. I mean, it's quite. Maybe also the blackness of it it also sort of obscures.
It's just shades of black. Where it's hollow, it's actually darker black. And then the surface treatment is slightly different for the.
And then the paper piece is cast from this.
From just one of this.
Well, and then what was the logic of bringing that in?
Just a skin peel of the positive to sort of really bring that and see the context against what's the positive that's there.
Wonderful. Is this all been sort of? I mean, does this happen over a long period of time? I mean, over months and months, you're making these things and then bringing them together, or is it all done rather quickly? Because there's what seems interesting on graphic terms. There's many different graphic devices. You've got stenciling, you've got jollies, and there's many different. I mean, it's all gibberish, but there's also many different fonts, and there's many. I mean, there's a hell of a lot going on.
Right.
Yeah.
So, when I first started to sort of play with it, it was hugely unsuccessful because everything actually would fall apart after 3 days.
Into the materials.
The materials. So, as far as the process is concerned, it took me a while. But it's interesting that you ask how I, in what frequency I created these. It's actually in different points in time over about 6 months. And which is why the font of the script is different every time I would go back to it.
So it feels like you're making these things at very different times, and then they came together into this
sort of
piece.
just presented.
Yeah, it's wonderful. But that adds a richness to it, which is just fantastic. They're very provocative, these things, I think.
And everything here is from the ceramic studio. So there are pigments, there are the whiting and dolomite and clays and sort of anything and everything that I have access to right within.
And you're thinking about this at the same time, or they kind of happen independently?
It's sort of happening in parallel. I refuse to have any assistants in the studio. So much so that I literally sweep and clean the studio myself. I have had a corporate life where, you know, I was a manager, there was a team, right? So if I wanted to be a
So
manager,
you like the solitude of it. Of
well,
doing
not as much solitude, but I don't want to give the pleasure of working in clay to someone else.
the pleasure
for
of
me.
sweeping the floor and washing the toilet.
That comes with it, but I think the idea of managing people in studio was not my thing at all. And therefore, in the context of clay, I think everything that is made out of my studio is what I can handle literally with my two hands. And yes, also the furnace, which is not a very small furnace. I do have a fairly large sized kiln. But I think whatever can be handled literally by myself, that immediately puts a limitation on scale of singular work. Yeah, I think that's really the reason why everything from my studio, and I can say that with a lot of confidence, will not.
I guess
be
I was just
large
surprised
scale.
because that piece at JKK and at KNMA was a really big piece.
But also components coming together.
Yeah, components coming
The
together.
single piece will never be large.
I see.
It will never be, if we were to sort of take an example, a Rainmaker kind of a scale of a singular piece. That'll never happen out of my studio, because that cannot happen without help. Humanly not possible.
Yeah. So
Right.
you're going to continue to work within these parameters.
Yes, because I mean, if I buy a nice car and I give it for you to drive, what's the point? So I'm not letting other people enjoy clay. I'm going to do that.
I mean, in terms
know.
of which ones are you're saying this is just the beginning of the exploration, and other pieces would be like, you know, this is okay. I've worked through this as much as I can, and now, but other ones are just the opening of a door.
So
Because there's many different things here.
Right. So I mean, it's that one singular idea that is being manifested in many ways. Is the way I'm seeing.
You see this all as one singular idea.
I do.
Really? Well, it's you. It's me, Mr. Rahul Kumar. Simple as that.
But you know, I mean, even interpretations. It's about the idea of preserving something that rightfully belongs to the trash can, or it's something that's never been told. It's this sort of, these are the two parts to the entire show in the way I'm seeing it. I think I really enjoyed referencing text and script. That is something that
And this is the first time we've done that.
this is the first time ever
Yeah,
that I've
okay.
done
So that's
this.
that's a new door you've opened.
That's something that I
Yeah.
am interested in. I'm already have certain things that I can't sort of wait to get back to studio and sort of start playing around with. The wheel and the color and the glaze and the gloss might just come back. I think it's about what's needed, what I feel would do justice to what I'm trying to sort of say. Absolutely no rules as far as that is concerned for me, right? So at the moment it felt that I don't need some of that. It was taken out of context.
Well, it goes back
out
to
of
what
this.
I was talking about. An artist needs to make commitments to certain parameters, and you've done that in this show. But then the thing, perhaps, with the destroyed industrial. Well, there's maybe two asides. The piece with the destroyed industrial sort of piled up, and then the language pieces are starting to go.
Right.
They're going in different directions from other things.
Now, I think the whole idea of working with the ceramic material on paper is also something that I really enjoyed.
It's got so many possibilities, and it's such a wonderful material that I've worked with it, and I think artists really enjoy working with it. I mean, it's a very sensual thing to work in clay. And I was often asked to be on panels about investing in art. And then everybody gets up there and says, oh, well, you just have to buy what you like, which is very hard because most people that are, you know, a lot of collectors coming in they're business people, they're professionals, they've got money, but they have no formal training in art. So they don't know what they like, you know, and they don't have the knowledge to discern things and all that. So these people all just sat up there and said, well, you just have to buy what you like. And I said, well, if you look at art history and the history of investing in art, no, do not buy what you like. Buy what makes you feel weird and uncomfortable and pulls the rug out from underneath your feet. Because that is the work that's taking risks and changing things and redefining what art is. And that's the art that becomes, you know, important and very, very valuable, right? So I'm sorry, but don't buy things that you like, that you're gonna like. Buy things that you don't like.
Right.
And then they just look at me like, oh, shut up, Peter, just get out of here. They see this, it gives them license and says, oh, okay, we can. There is a place for this. There's a context
You know,
for this.
and
But we
hopefully that-
need more galleries. We need, you know, everybody has more shows. But that gives the people the confidence to say, okay, I can break out of these parameters, which feel safe.
You know, but
because
what-
otherwise they're like, what am I going to do with this stuff? Yeah.
You know, but I still find a lot of people stuck to, oh, what clay did you use here? I mean, is that wood firing? You know, I mean, sure, I'll tell you what it is, but can you please just enjoy the work for what it is at the moment? And then there is someone who's like, oh, I did these squished pots way back in 2018, right?
Sure, yeah.
You know, so I said, yes, okay, so this probably is dated after that. There are 100 people who have done before that. And Subodh and Manish and I have done that too, except not in clay. So, you know, my point is it just very quickly comes back to the craft. And my feeling attached to the craft, the technique, oh, that's glaze that I developed and that's my recipe, it'll die with me. I think that's the problem fundamentally, and we just have to move forward and ahead of that. A process cannot be anyone's ownership. You know, so I don't know if I answered your question, but